Game demos and other pre-release examples can be a tricky thing to get right. If they're done well, then they can generate a lot of excitement about a project. If not, they can generate apathy and harm future sales.
Hi, I'm Caliban, and today we're going to talk about giving your prospective market the right sort of example. You see, I played something the other day and it really put me in a bad mood. I'm not going to name it because I don't want to come across as petty, so let's just say it's an upcoming RTS that hasn't yet arrived at a full release and leave it at that. The thing that bugged me was just how similar the gameplay was to a couple of other very popular titles. Not older franchises that are long dead, but games that are either active or recent enough to be very well remembered. As I said, this wasn't a release copy, far from it. So I can't comment on future plans for story and characters, but from a gameplay perspective, things were strikingly familiar. I don't mean the basic RTS concepts, as those are pretty standard these days, but the exact manner of resource collection, building, management, map layout, and the look, feel and production of the individual units. It was so similar that I immediately knew exactly how to play on my very first attempt, and everything worked exactly how I expected. This wasn't because it had an amazing tutorial or a hugely intuitive interface, but because I had essentially played the same game before. I think I noticed one mechanic that was slightly different, but it wasn't one of those fun mechanics that make you think about all of its implications on unit compositions and tactics, but rather an additional limitation that prevented you from doing what you wanted to do until you had met the criteria. After less than an hour, I put the game down and decided it wasn't for me. I just wasn't interested. I already had the full version of games just like it already installed on my system. I remember I said aloud to myself, what's the point? As far as I can tell, there's only really two reasons to essentially make the same game again. Firstly, the previous game could be very old. Perhaps it doesn't run on modern systems, or maybe the graphics and the UI are seriously outdated. I think that's a perfectly valid reason to recreate a similar experience. If it's a very popular game, then it might get an official remaster, but otherwise you're going to need someone else to remake the game in order to bring it to a modern audience, and I don't have a problem with any of that. The second reason, if it's heavily a story-based game and you're happy enough with the mechanics and just feel like the tale you're telling is worthy enough to warrant a second game. I don't really feel like this second reason often holds much water, especially for real-time strategy games. I mean, I love a good campaign story, but the gameplay has got to be the primary factor. Sometimes the campaign might be worth expanding, but then again, isn't that what DLC are for? I guess if you're making a sequel in a series, then I'm probably a bit more forgiving. After all, you did all of the time and effort in the previous installment, so if you want to keep much of the functionality the same, then I guess it's not too bad. So what bugged me about this particular game was it was from an independent developer. Creating complex strategy games with decent amount of depth is pretty difficult for a small studio. You've got low budgets and a small team, and therefore far less access to technical and artistic expertise. But it's not all downsides. Because you don't have a board of directors or a massive array of producers, designers, market researchers, advertisers and consultants, then there's very little to get in the way of your creative vision. You've got the ability to really create something different and interesting. You can try out some brand new ideas, or maybe see what happens when you combine old ideas in a new way. If you think about it, then this is really your only option if you're hoping for anything approaching popularity. The majors can use massive marketing power or brand loyalty to turn average titles into financial successes, but independent studios just don't have that as an option. The feeling of frustration I had was furthered by the fact that technically the product was quite competent. This didn't feel like a solo developer making their first proper attempt at a commercial game, but instead something that a small team would be quite proud of. It was reasonably complex, it had a fully 3D engine and it had pretty high quality graphics, sounds and animations. So this was the essence of my frustration and my question. If you are an independent studio with complete creative control over your project and a decent amount of technical competence, then why on earth would you essentially try and copy a game that already exists? I guess there are of course several explanations to this, but none of them are very flattering, so we'll park that, as I'm sure you can work them out for yourselves.
It is true that many base building real-time strategy games have plenty of crossover. As far as I can tell, there are sort of 5 primary categories. First of all, you've got your Command & Conquer types. This obviously includes the other Westwood series games like Red Alert and Dune. I think it's also fair to include KKND and perhaps Dark Reign as well. I'm not basing this on any sort of complex criteria, just a certain vibe you get from playing the game. After this, you've got your Warcrafts and your Starcrafts. Again, no specific criteria, just games that have this sort of look and feel. I think it's pretty safe to put games like Armies of Exego in this category too, as well as some more modern titles like Stormgate. The next branch is bigger and broader, and I would roughly describe it as stuff that stemmed from Age of Empires. This includes the entire Age of series, and I would also probably include stuff like Empire Earth and Rise of Nations too. I don't mean that all these games are the same, but just that they share an ancestor and they've got more in common with that than with the other lineages I've described. On from that, you've got games that grew from Total Annihilation, Supreme Commander, Planetary Annihilation, Zero K and Beyond All Reason, as well as the upcoming Sanctuary Shattered Sun. It's pretty easy to recognise these games, and I think they're well defined by the streaming economy system as well as the huge scale. The 5th branch is based around games that took a lot of cues from Dawn of War. These generally include a sector capture based resource system, squads rather than individual units, and some sort of battlefield cover system too. Company of Heroes fits this perfectly, as does Iron Harvest. But even within these branches, you've still got a lot of variation, and there are plenty of games that don't even fit into any of these molds. I've covered quite a few of them on my channel. Tooth and Tail is a great example, as is Access and Allies and Terran Command. There are also stacks of real-time strategy games that don't feature any base building. This is all good stuff, as it's nice to have variety. But this makes me wonder, if many of the games I do enjoy are indeed quite mechanically similar, what was it about my recent experience that frustrated me so much? I cast my mind back to a year or so ago when I took a look at Empires Apart.
This was a double whammy of disappointment. Not only was it a very blatant rip-off of Age of Empires, but it was also really poorly executed. I quite liked the simple but clear graphics, but aside from that it was technically unimpressive, felt pretty clunky, and lacked any charm or depth whatsoever.
But there was one thing that it did share with the game that I tried the other day. It had zero character and story. Empires Apart is a finished game, so the lack of these elements was a choice dictated by bad or lazy design. However, the game I alluded to in my intro wasn't anywhere near complete. The developers have got big plans for story and character, but all they were able to show at the time was the multiplayer battles. I think that's the big problem with going into early access or making a demo that only includes the mechanical aspects of your game. If those mechanics aren't unique, then people are going to think that your entire game is a copy because you've only showed them the things that are the same. They can only form opinions on what you demonstrate, and if that doesn't include anything new or interesting, then those opinions are probably going to be negative. This is in stark contrast to the demo of Tempest Rising I played a while back. This included an introductory cutscene, as well as a couple of missions each with their own briefing. It had a fully fleshed out interface, some music, and gave me a feel for the complete game, rather than a small slice of it outside of any context, and I think that's essentially the difference.
Games are a sum of all of their component parts. The setting, the story, the voice acting, the graphics, the sounds, the music and the mechanics, all of those elements blend together to create a complete experience. And if you only present people with a handful of these items, then any similarities that do exist will be severely heightened.
Many of the games we play might be mechanically similar, but all of the other elements working in concert gives them a very different feel, and as such we get a very different experience. If you think about Command & Conquer and Red Alert for a moment, you can easily admit that from a mechanical point of view they are essentially the same game. There were some small engine improvements between the two releases, but resource collection, base building and unit production are all pretty much identical, as is how the units look, move and fight. Some of the infantry and vehicles are just carbon copies between the games, and although there are new inclusions, we're not talking about massive differences here. But Red Alert doesn't feel like a pointless copy. Like we said, games are a sum of all of their component parts, and the overall presentation is very different. We've got a brand new setting and a new story, new characters, new cutscenes, We've got whole new campaigns with different sets of missions and brand new objectives. We've got new music, new unit responses, and a new look and feel to the user interface. If Westwood had released a demo that just included the skirmish mode, then I think it would have got a pretty poor reception. It would have been immediately written off as a reskin of Command & Conquer, and probably wouldn't have gone on to sell 3 million copies. Now, Red Alert did have a demo, but it didn't include skirmish mode. What it included was the 2nd and 5th mission from the Allied campaign and the 2nd mission from the Soviet campaign. Because the graphics, sound, story and mission design were all completely different, the fact that the underlying game engine was the same just didn't matter. Users that tried the demo weren't just shown the things that were the same, they were shown plenty of what was different, and they got to play 3 whole new missions they'd never seen before. Because of this, it both properly represented the game and gave the audience a good reason to make a future purchase. I think my recent experience and this example present the case for some degree of caution for studios looking to provide users an experience with their unfinished game, whether it be via an open or a closed beta, a demo or an early access release. The nuts and bolts of the game engine are just one component of a complete game. And when your early release amounts to some standalone skirmish play, then that's all you're demonstrating. If your game is truly innovative and contains some very interesting mechanical differences, then sometimes this approach is viable.
But if it's very close to something that already exists, then I think you're setting yourself up for a fall. You can make all of the promises you like on your Steam store page, your Kickstarter profile and your own website and on your Twitter feed and all that rubbish. But if the first playable example you release contains no evidence of anything other than mechanics, then I don't think anyone will really care. I think this is indicative of a genre that appears to be packed full of developers who continue to make the same incorrect basic assumptions about the player base. How many times do we have to say that most RTS players don't care about versus multiplayer? Surely this is no secret anymore. It's something that plenty of people have mentioned, and also something backed up by statistics.
You don't have to go too far to find them, just check out some of the achievements on your Steam games. Based on a few quick checks, I would say that in most games fewer than 20% of players actually joined a multiplayer game, and if we're talking about making a proper go at it, then that number will often drop below 10%. 2020's Iron Harvest has an achievement for playing any sort of multiplayer game, something that only 18.5% of its players have done. Tempest Rising has one for winning a single multiplayer match, and that's at 13.1%. Are these numbers rich with enough detail and depth to build a complex dataset? No, but they are representative enough to easily say that versus multiplayer interests only a small minority of players. You know this, I know this, everybody knows this. So why are so many developers still so deluded? Fans of real-time strategy games are all generally looking for the same sorts of things.
We want a half-decent story that generates some interest and gives us a nice single-player experience, so we can learn about the universe and the mechanics all at the same time. We want to be challenged and we want to feel satisfied when we overcome those challenges. We want a decent skirmish mode too, with a competent AI, so that the game has a reasonable amount of replayability. And ideally, we want some sort of cooperative experience too, so we can share this fun with our friends. If we got all of those things, then we are generally happy. We might not be playing the game for years to come, but we won't feel shortchanged by the purchase and will be happy to recommend it to others. If the game also includes some interesting new mechanics and lots of new and fun toys for us to play with, then we'll be overjoyed. But we don't expect every game to be outstanding, as that's just not what outstanding means.
By the very nature of the definition, most games will be average, and just as we've all probably watched and enjoyed many average films and TV shows, we've all probably played and enjoyed many average games. It might be a minority of players, but there are still a sizable number that want to engage in competitive multiplayer. This is why it's still an important consideration, even if it's not the primary one, and the reason why it's not something that should be completely neglected. But there is something I want you to mull over. Think about all of the most popular multiplayer real-time strategy games at the moment. We're probably looking at StarCraft 2, Brood War and Age of Empires 4. Do you think that it's a coincidence that all of these games also include excellent single-player modes that contain a lot of world building and story content? I really get the feeling that when it comes to real-time strategy, a strong multiplayer scene grows not out of a game designed specifically for it, but rather a solid overall experience that also features quality multiplayer options. So, what's the message here? Perhaps some words of warning for those involved with the development of RTS games. You might be a solo developer, a member of an indie team, or perhaps just a small cog in a big machine. You might be a tester, or maybe a Kickstarter backer, or just anyone with some degree of influence on the process. Take a big step back and look at the project you're involved with, or maybe the next project you're planning. If all of your primary ideas are focused on the mechanics of skirmishes or the versus mode, then perhaps you need to rearrange your priorities before you release your demo or open beta. Have a think about what makes your game different from all of the other great titles that already exist. Is it just the mechanics? Or is it a complex combination of setting, story, characters, campaign and gameplay? If it is the first, then go ahead and release your multiplayer demo. Impress us with what you've come up with, as if it's both innovative, interesting and exciting, then I'm sure you'll do just fine. But if your game only stands out as a complete package, then you need to give us a representative sample rather than a small slice of the pie.
This means that your factions, story and mission design can't be relegated to an afterthought. And if all of those elements are unloved and untouched, dangling at the bottom of your to-do list, then maybe it's time to have a bit of a rethink.
There is another real-time strategy game currently under development, and when you look at their core feature list, you can immediately see these problems spelled out right in front of you. This list is divided into two columns: what they guarantee and what will only be included if their Kickstarter campaign reaches its goal.
The second column is where the story, campaign and cooperative modes are sitting. And because the demo is launching on the same day as the Kickstarter, then we know that all we'll be seeing in the demo is just multiplayer or skirmish mode.
I think this will be a problem, as although the game does look interesting, there is another alternative out there that is already reasonably popular and has the benefit of an existing audience and quite a lot of balancing and polish. When will developers learn the importance of setting, story, characters, campaigns and mission design? As a developer, you might not care about them, but your prospective audience probably will. And when you put out a demo, beta or go into early access, they're the ones you're trying to impress. I love game demos and they do influence my purchase decisions, and I'm pretty sure I'm not unique in that regard.
Hi there, thanks for sitting through this little chat about game demos. If you enjoyed this video, then click the like button. And if you've got something to add, you can do so on the Discord or just in a comment below. And as usual, if you want more of this sort of thing, then subscribe to my channel and I hope to see you back soon.